There's talk of another bank crisis brewing in the United States. Last year, 3 of the largest U.S. banks failed, creating the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in history. Now, I have some money in the United States. I've got money in a lot of countries. To the people who are watching this and saying, I'm not sure what to do with my money, I think there's a very simple solution. It's simply diversifying your money to countries where it's much safer. And today I'm going to tell you not only what's happening in this brewing bank crisis, but what you can do to actually protect yourself and not just worry about it. Here's a story from the Wall Street Journal. It's about a bank called New York Community Bancorp and how it went, in their words, from a crisis winner to banking's next worry. I don't know anything about New York Community Bancorp. I've never met them. But the Wall Street Journal says they closed a transformational deal in late 2022, just before this first crisis brewed in 2023. They bought mortgage lender Flagstar to nearly double in size. 4 months later, it struck again, buying parts of Signature Bank, one of the first banks to fail in the U.S. in 2023, which had just been seized by regulators. These deals, say the newspaper, catapulted NYCB from a relatively small local lender focused on niche commercial real estate deals into the regulators' group of big diversified commercial banks, crossing $100 billion in assets, but also bringing increased scrutiny. But now, the Wall Street Journal says, NYCB said it needed to make changes to ensure its balance sheet was befitting its new stature, kicking off a series of events that have rocked its stock and credit ratings and raising questions about its soundness. Now, meanwhile in Singapore, where I spent some time, the banks are lending money to their central bank. The banks are super strong. They are some of the strongest banks in the world. And so I'm just going to tell you before we dig further into this, if you're sitting in the United States, understand that the strongest bank that anyone would probably deal with is 60th on the list of strongest banks in the world. The names that most people have heard are 68th and 69th. Banks in places like Singapore, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, other European countries, even the UAE are now stronger. These are the numbers, these are the facts, than banks in the United States. And so, to the people this article in the Wall Street Journal interviewed who are concerned about their $5 million or $10 million that they're keeping aside for their next real estate deal, because that's who this NYCB attracted, to me, you can wire money for a real estate deal from anywhere in the world. And if you're concerned that you have a large amount of money in the bank waiting to do a real estate deal, waiting to do an M&A deal, you've built up that war chest to buy some company. Maybe you want to buy a company. Maybe you're trying to buy a house, whatever. Maybe you just have lots of money. Maybe you're one of our clients who has $100 million and you keep $20 million in cash. Where do you keep it? You probably don't want to open 80 different bank accounts, each to $250,000. Or if you're in Europe, it's even worse. It's 100,000 euros is the insured limit. How do you make sure your money is safe? Obviously, plenty of people keep above those insured limits. But here's what the Wall Street Journal says. People are actually concerned. They talked to one person who said one New York City property owner who kept tens of millions of dollars at Signature Bank until it failed in early 2023, and now banks at NYCB, said he is considering his options. Now, my first thought is, you can have multiple banks. What if you're keeping tens of millions of dollars for real estate, and you can adjust this for the scale of whatever level you're at? Why don't you put some of the money kind of in colder storage, where maybe that's for the deal 6 months, 12 months, 24 months from now, whatever your pace is. Keep some money in the current bank and diversify that risk. Let me give you a specific example. You can go, and you might need someone to refer you. It depends on how you approach it. You could go to one of the big 3 banks in Singapore. They're number 12, 13, and 14 on the list of the world's strongest banks, and I would argue the most accessible banks to the average person. Americans cannot go and make investments in those banks generally. The SEC rules basically forbid you to do that. But you can keep cash in US dollars or other currencies in those banks. And so if you have money you're going to hold on to for 6 months, why not have, let's say, a property that you're selling, wire that money to Singapore? Now, I understand people in the United States don't think that. I sold a house in the United States many years ago, and when they asked where I wanted my proceeds sent, and I said, wire it to Singapore, the woman said, where's that? It's a country, and it's one of the strongest countries for actually protecting assets around the world. So you probably haven't thought about it if you're living especially in the US or Canada, where people look very much inward in the financial system. But why don't you wire the funds from one sale to Singapore, let it sit there for 6 months in a bank that's number 12 or number 13 on the list, rather than keeping it in not even the 68th or 69th strongest bank, but other than JP Morgan and Bank of America and Bank of New York Mellon and a few farm banks. There's really no other US banks on that list of the top 100. If you can bank with the 12th strongest bank, why would you bank with, we don't know if it's the 112th or 212th or 1012th, but obviously what we do know is there are people who are banking at these mid-level banks who are saying, yeah, we are concerned. And so you don't have to keep all your money in one bank. Quite frankly, banks, sure, if you've got tens of millions of dollars and they know, hey, he's always selling real estate and buying real estate, you're probably not going to have that many problems. But what have we heard from our clients? I want to take out money to buy a car or to buy a boat or to do whatever. And they gave me the third degree. We've had people say that they practically didn't let me take my own money out. So just for transactional day-to-day banking, wouldn't it be nice to have a place, let's say you even love your bank in the US, wouldn't it be nice to have a place where you could just, hey, they're easier at taking money out. They don't bother you so much about taking your own money out. Wouldn't it be better to have a debit card from a place where it's easier? Now, if you live in the United States, let's be clear, and there are other countries that do this as well, any foreign bank accounts have to be reported. I'm not suggesting that you avoid any of that. I'm suggesting you fill out all the forms. It's one thing at Nomad Capitalist. We've got a large number of tax professionals in every country. They can help you fill out the relatively straightforward forms and make sure that you're in full legal compliance. Keeping money overseas does not mean that your real estate deals aren't taxed. There's no tax savings at all. The country you live in, generally speaking, if you're in the West, is the country that taxes you. What we're talking about is why be in the 1,012th strongest bank when you can be in the 12th strongest bank. So this is one of the many things that I see as someone who grew up in the United States and has now become much more international, doesn't go to the United States anymore. Yes, it's a small piece of my puzzle for banks and stocks, but largely I found greener pastures. People sit in the US think, oh my God, the banking system, can we trust it? Well, listen, I'm not saying the banking system is collapsing. I'm not saying everyone's going to lose their money. But let's be honest who most media articles are focused at. The person who has under 100,000 euros in the bank. The person who has under $250,000 in the bank. That's the vast majority of people, so that's who the media focuses on. But if you're the person with tens of millions of dollars, what do? Well, according to the Wall Street Journal, there are groups where these real estate developers, they talk. Half are leaving the bank, half are staying with the bank. Again, why don't we take a more nuanced approach? Keep some working capital in that bank, move some to Singapore. I can send a wire to buy property in New York tomorrow if I wanted to, from a bank in Singapore, from a bank pretty much on anywhere on earth, without having to be in the bank in person. I can do it from the app. I can send a form to the banker if it's above my limit, which maybe a big real estate deal would be, and it's handled in a matter of minutes. Much more user-friendly. I can hold my money in other currencies if I want to. I can potentially get higher interest rates on my US dollars or other currencies than I would get in the United States. So I can, put out a 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 2 month term deposit or a sweep account, and I can potentially get a higher interest rate than I would in the US. And I can send the money to Singapore or any other country I choose, and I can send it back in. Again, there's going to be, a few forms to fill out. Nothing that's that difficult if you have the right professionals. And you're not going to necessarily save on taxes because your business is still where you live. But I think far too many people in a country like the United States think this is how it works everywhere. Every year, 3 big zillion-dollar banks collapse. I don't think there's been like a single bank failure in the history of Singapore. Asian countries are much more conservative. Some of the European countries are much more conservative. There are fewer bank failures in Panama than there are in the United States, and Panama also has a lot of banks. I mean, some of these countries, they don't have that many big banks. The US has a lot of banks. You think, okay, well, some of them are going to fail. Here's the big issue, though. From the Wall Street Journal, the government used emergency measures to backstop deposits at Signature, which failed last year, even those over the $250,000 FDIC limit. So in the US, banks are insured to $250,000. If you have under that, you're fine as long as you figure, hey, too many banks aren't going to collapse at once because the FDIC has about 1.3% of all the deposits insured. You saw some of the biggest bank failures ever in the US. It wiped out a decent-sized chunk of that FDIC fund. Now, you're reliant on the US government essentially, and this was mentioned in the article where some of the developers said, hey, we got lucky with Signature where, hey, you had $5 million, the FDIC covers $250,000, but, government stepped in, make sure everyone got their money back. Are they going to do that again? One of the articles that I read says the FDIC, if all of its money were wiped out, I think about 25% was wiped out with these 3 failures. let's say there was a string of these and it got worse. If the FDIC got wiped out, oh, they can borrow another $100 billion from the US government under the law. But then it said, oh, well, what if the debt ceiling is under negotiation? How does that work? Congress could basically hold up the fact that you get your money back. And listen, okay, fine. I mean, should the government be socializing all the losses of someone keeping $10 million in their bank? Perhaps not. But if you're dealing in tens of millions of dollars, are you going to go and open up 40 different accounts? No, you're probably going to try and find the safest, the most user-friendly bank to run your business. But do understand, you are reliant on the government if you have any level of money that in the US, for example, the bank goes under, spin the wheel. Are they going to, is your bank going to be taken over by another bank that just absorbs your deposits? Is the government going to step in and pay people back to make sure things work well? I'd like to have more control over my tens of millions of dollars than that. And so even if you don't distrust the United States, even if you don't distrust the dollar, if you're happy, keeping your business, keeping your investments, keeping everything in the US, why wouldn't you just find the safest bank? Our 5 magic words are go where you're treated best. And number 1 bank in the world is not the United States for safety. I don't think it's for customer service. And again, if you're thinking, well, how do I run that if I bank in Singapore or in Switzerland? How do I go into the branch and make the transfer? That's exactly the point. Your banks are lagging in terms of when you have to send a large amount of money, it's easier in those countries. They're more set up for this kind of stuff. The US system, I guess it's gotten a little bit better since I left. It is lagging compared to the rest of the options around the world. So the banks overseas, in many cases, can be safer. They can be more user-friendly. Potentially there's a higher interest rate on your savings if you need to do that. And so if you're someone who has cash balances, look at where can I bank overseas. Now, our R&D team, we've got about 5.5 full-time people who do all kinds of research and development around the world. We're in the process of talking to about 1,000 different banks. We have our back-end system is called Minerva. We keep all kinds of data on all kinds of things from residence permits, citizenships, asset protection, trusts, foreign corporations, maybe some of the stuff you also need in terms of maybe your money offshore should be in a trust structure for some kind of estate planning, for some kind of asset protection that's further to what you have onshore. Just moving some money offshore, you probably don't want to open just one bank account. You want to look at how can I use the rest of the world and what it has to offer to protect my assets. And make sure that whether it's the government or the bank or whatever else, I'm in the best shape I can be. But we talk to all these different banks. There are better options out there. And because I'm aware of that, because I've spent many, many, many years of my life personally and now with a whole team figuring out these options, I can sit here and tell you I'd rather keep most of my money in other countries. And again, I'm no longer a US citizen, so I don't have to report those accounts to the US government. But even if I did, that's not a deterrent. I think people look at this offshore stuff as being too complicated and too weird. You file 1 or 2 forms a year to report some bank accounts. And if you have a trust, you file a form to report that. This is stuff, we've got tax professionals, they'll do that for you. That's the most simple thing they'll do all day for you. So what you want to do is work with someone like Nomad Capitalist to figure out, okay, what's the holistic picture to your particular situation? What do you need to accomplish? You don't want to just open a bank account with some guy who runs a Google ad and, we open bank accounts. I'll tell you what, by the way, half the time those people come to us and say they didn't open the account for me because it's a bit more nuanced than just pick an account from a list. But you want to figure out the entire system of, hey, I'm worried about the banks in my country failing. I'm worried about the stability of the dollar. I'm worried about maybe the government's going to harass me one day and they're just going to come after people with money, wealth tax, whatever else. Say, hey, how do I plan for that? It could be bank accounts. It could be trusts. It could be a second passport. It could be, why are you buying real estate in New York? You should be buying it over here. Higher yields, more secure, more safe. Maybe you move there. Who knows what your personal situation is? Look at this brewing bank crisis. Not my words, Wall Street Journal's words. People are worried about it. As more of an existential question to protect yourself and your money. There are going to be better opportunities than buying real estate in New York, and there already are better opportunities than keeping all of your money in these US banks. If you want to live in the US, you want to stay a US citizen, I don't judge you for that just because I made a different decision. Most of our clients do that. But I do want you to understand holistically how you can take advantage of this and make sure that you are further ahead in terms of protecting yourself than 99.9% of people. If you go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, you'll learn how we help people do that. It's not just opening a bank account. It's a whole approach to understanding what you need to do to solve this problem.